So let's talk about the anxious preoccupied attachment style and how your fear of uncertainty can really sabotage relationships without even recognizing. In this video, we'll cover where this comes from, why this is happening to you, and how to actually stop it through three simple and powerful steps. The very first thing you need to understand is, what is this fear of uncertainty to begin with, and why is this taking place for you? Well, it's because as an anxious preoccupied person, especially if you were the type of person who developed your anxious preoccupied style in childhood, which is the vast majority of individuals. And if you didn't know already, our attachment style actually originally develops between the ages of 0 to 2, but because we have neuroplasticity, if we are exposed to a whole bunch of different experiences, perhaps a bad divorce when you're 9 or things like that, our attachment style can shift over time without us intentionally trying to reprogram it. So going back to this is, if you had your anxious attachment style develop in childhood, okay, if it wasn't something that developed later on, maybe you were secure and then you went through something difficult and became anxious. If it developed in childhood, it developed at a time for you that you were completely dependent on your caregivers to survive. And if you look at the human species, like, we are really reliant on our caregivers compared to other species as a whole. And so what you'll see is that as an anxious child, if you had the experience of having a lot of what creates AP attachment style, this inconsistency, maybe your caregivers are very loving, but they're working a lot, they're not very available to you. Maybe your caregivers are very loving, but there's a huge family and there's not really enough time for you one-on-one. All these different dynamics can create a perceived sense of abandonment that happens over and over again. And the longer this goes on for, where you feel like there's like this love and connection and it's taken away, and love and connection and it's taken away, that fear of abandonment that will develop because of those experiences, or if you, of course, have a real abandonment, like a parent leaving or things like that, these dynamics imprint the subconscious mind. But because it happens at a time when you're very young, your subconscious mind recognizes that it's literally dependent on your caregivers for survival. So it's not just a fear of abandonment that develops, but that fear of abandonment is actually tied to a fear of not being safe, not being able to survive. Because literally, as a very young child, you have almost no way of going out and paying the bills and making sure there's a roof over your head as a child. So there's this essence and this understanding of, okay, I need my caregivers in order to survive. If they keep making me feel abandoned, I can't survive without them. Now I also feel unsafe. And that feeling of unsafety, that core wound of unsafety, and the way it disrupts your nervous system and puts you into this fight or flight mode or sympathetic nervous system function, is what causes you to try to cope by clinging to certainty, by trying to get answers from people, like in relationships as an adult. So what you'll see here is, like, you've got this fear of abandonment that's also connected to this fear of not surviving without connection. And now, as an adult, with that subconscious landscape, and you bring this into your adult romantic relationships. And as I'm sure you know from watching this channel, we essentially use our adult romantic relationships to replace our caregiver relationships, or the relationship we have to our parents, our primary caregivers as children. Well, now whatever's unsolved from there gets projected onto your romantic partner as an adult. So this fear of being abandoned connects to this fear of, I can't survive without connection. I can't survive without other people in relationships. And it triggers this sympathetic nervous system mode where you feel panicked. And then from that space, you probably will find that you do almost anything you can to seek certainty, right? Like, I need reinforcement. I need validation. I need to know that we're all good, that we're going to be okay. I need an answer of, what are we? Where are we at in the relationship? Um, and so, of course, you go through that experience. And in fact, anxious preoccupieds, when they're going through this feeling of distress, that feeling of distress is actually a trauma response. That panic system that comes on, that sympathetic nervous system function, that's a trauma response because of unprocessed, unresolved trauma from past childhood experiences. So hopefully that helps you understand that a little bit more. But now, what do you actually do? Well, the way out of this, if I had to summarize, and I'm going to give you three really powerful steps, is you have to learn to individuate. Individuation is the way out of this. And what does that actually mean? So, individuation means developing your own sense of self. And I want to share something really, really important here. When I would work with client after client after client after client, I would see over and over again the people who didn't care very much about what other people thought of them were people who had properly individuated. The people, on the other hand, who were really tied to, the fear of rejection, worrying about what people thought, people pleasing all the time, really concerned with, if I do this, what are people going to think of me? Ruminating about these sorts of dynamics. They were always the people who hadn't individuated. So what does it mean to individuate? Well, for, a very simplified process of explaining it, it's to learn to go your own way. It's to understand who you are and to design your own life and carve your own path from the inside out, rather than making your life's decisions all about your external world and what people will think, feel, say, and do. And in order to individuate, you have to have a sense of certainty, keyword, in who you are. And the problem with like tying our sense of self and identity to the outside world is that the expectations from the outside world will forever change and they will trap you. They will keep you feeling imprisoned. If you are constantly in a position where you feel like you have to please your parent, you have to please your friend, you have to please your boss, and so you're not going to do things that are truthful for you. You're going to keep going against yourself in the process, and you're not going to give yourself time to even discover who you really are, then you're constantly going to feel trapped by the outside world and pressured. And because there's this lack of sense of self identity, what that means is that without this sense of self identity, there's this intrinsic feeling of constant uncertainty. So then when people further take away a sense of certainty from you, right? Because they're inconsistent, let's say, with their behaviors or their calls or their text messages, it's actually mirroring to you what is taking place within you. That sense of uncertainty being taken away is something you're actually doing to yourself on a daily basis. Now, we heal this by learning to give ourselves our own certainty. And in order to do that, you actually have to have a relationship to yourself. So, point number one here is in order to build this individuated relationship to self, you always have to start by introspecting. We can't love somebody and develop a relationship to somebody we don't know. And that really doesn't change in the relationship to yourself. In fact, I would actually say it becomes more important. It has a greater impact. So think of when you're first dating somebody. You sit down and you go on a couple of dates, you ask them questions, you try to discover who they are, what they want, what's important to them, what makes them tick. This is the whole process of dating. Over the few months you're going to spend dating somebody, you have to ask them hard questions, deep questions, meaningful questions. You have to build that same kind of relationship to self. And usually an anxious preoccupied's kind of set point or foundation in the relationship to self is so that they are trying to fit into the external world's expectations of them. It's like they're doing life from the outside in instead of from the inside out. And this gives you no place to rest, right? This gives you no sense of inner purpose, inner security in who I am, inner certainty in terms of what I want for myself and what my boundaries are, or my morals, or my standards for life. And so you're always going to feel like you're in this constant state of chasing until you do this work. And so, to take it a step further, we have to start by number one, introspecting. And this isn't something that you sit down for 30 minutes and do and the job's done. This is a process. This is probably a never ending process, because I would argue that as human beings, we also change, aspects of self change. And so we have to be able to learn, what do we need? What are our boundaries? What is our ideal life? What do we feel our purpose actually is here? And that's something that can't be told to you. That's something that you can't get from what job your parent thinks you should be in, or, what career is going to make you most attractive to the opposite sex, or to somebody you're sexually interested in, same sex as well, right? But when people are going through this experience, we have to be able to actually take the time to consider, who am I? That's point number one. Number two, we have to learn to get present with ourselves. This is the next really important part of individuation. And what I mean by being able to get into relationship to self and be present with ourselves, I mean, be in your body, practice and experience what it means to embody your relationship to self, to be in a state of embodiment. And this means being able to recognize when things don't feel right. When somebody violates a boundary for you, somebody upsets you, you need to have your feeling signals operating. Okay. So you can pick up and be like, you know what? When that person asked me to do this thing over the weekend, I actually don't feel comfortable doing that. I don't want to do that. And from that space of being in our body and able to notice emotions and sensations taking place in our body, we're able to be guided by the wisdom of our body that's really there, by understanding what our feelings are actually communicating to us. And so we have to get into relationship with what it means to feel, and not feel like try to push your emotions down until you're really panicked and anxious and then try to get somebody else to soothe them externally for you. I mean, actually feel your own emotions. It's a huge part of self-soothing. And step three, and before I go into step three, by the way, if you want to do a whole workshop course with a workbook, all these different things on individuation, you can actually click the link down below and access a course for free for 7 days that will go really deep into embodiment, presence within self, individuation, understanding yourself, your self identity, your needs, all these different components that are a huge part of healing, and also actually being more attractive to other people, because I'll save that part for the end. I'll tell you why it's more attractive at the end. Um, but part three here is that you then have to execute acting as you are. And what I mean by that is, when you're in this position where you're like, okay, I know that I want to live XYZ kind of life for myself. I know that, I'm feeling certain ways about different things for what's okay with me, what's not okay for me. Then what we have to be able to do is communicate. We have to be able to share these things with other people in our lives. And I know anxious, preoccupied individuals have these fears of, if I say these things and I say no to somebody about something, I'm going to be a burden, or I'm going to be disliked or rejected. But when you develop a deep sense of knowing yourself and a deep sense of actually feeling excited and inspired by the life that you want to create for yourself and the life that you want to live, because you spend 30 minutes, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, digging into yourself and trying to understand yourself and what's important to you and what your needs are and how you want to design your life. And then you start feeling about it and you're able to see when things are falling into alignment with it or not. Then when you start communicating and sharing these things with other people in your life, at that point, you are going to know who you are and have that sense of certainty within yourself enough that by sharing and communicating that, it's not going to be challenging this sense of self. It's not going to be challenging this, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose more certainty, and I go into panic. And when people are trying to build relationships with other attachment styles or with other people as a whole, they're not attracted to, I see this time and time again working with people, is they're not attracted to people who are too agreeable. They're not attracted to, there's this quote that says, we are, optimal growth occurs at the border between support and challenge. And we are designed and wired in relationships to be supported and to yearn for that support and people to agree with us and back us. But if we're over supported, we never grow. And one of our 6 basic human needs is for growth. And so if we are never growing, a lot of people aren't interested in a relationship that's not going to help them grow. A lot of people subconsciously are not wired for being attracted to too much agreeableness. In fact, a lot of people are really attracted to people who will also challenge them, and to have that border of both support and challenge. That's where that optimal growth occurs. And so, when we're getting into relationships and we see somebody as being too agreeable and there's no challenge, that can actually subconsciously push people away and make them less attracted to somebody that they might be dating. So, it's really important to see that there's an impact here. Now, by learning to individuate, by actually being able to drive your sense of certainty from who you are, not what people's approval is of you, not what people think of you, you'll see that fear of uncertainty goes away, because certainty is like a cup we're trying to fill. And if we have a hole at the bottom of the cup because we have no certainty within the relationship to ourselves, it's problematic. But if we have a full cup that's working, right? The bottom's there, everything's there, and then somebody pours into the cup, we're okay, right? We can actually receive that sense of certainty. And if they don't, we're still okay, because we're able to drive our sense of actual certainty from the inside out. And that means that cup is already halfway full all the time. So there's no need to panic if you don't feel like if you don't feel like you're in a relationship where somebody's giving you enough certainty. In fact, you may even know, I have relationship standards that say, I want somebody who's going to bring certainty into my life and relationships. And so I'm not actually wanting to be with somebody who's not willing to show up for these standards or needs that I have. And because you know who you are and what your standards are, and you're certain about that, you also will have the ability to leave relationships that are not serving you, should that be the case. So Really important topic, individuation. If you want to do a much deeper dive into individuation, please feel free to check out the link in the description box below. And also, if you want to take a free attachment style quiz to figure out your attachment style and get a free report from PDS and be able to track and monitor your percentages, you can use that link in the description box there as well. So I hope this is helpful for you today. Thank you so much for watching and for being here. Please let me know any questions you have down below on uncertainty, on individuation. Even if you want to share a little bit about your story and where you think you sit in terms of individuation, I would love to hear from you. And thank you for stopping by. Thank you for being here. And please like, share, and subscribe if you're enjoying this channel. And I will see you in tomorrow's video.